Wyoming Territory, May 1879. The wind rolled low and steady across the green rise of the Laramie Plains, brushing the tall grass like a hand smoothing a lover's hair. Evelyn O'Dell stepped down from her wagon, brushing dust from her skirt, and looked toward the herd of cattle spread across the gentle valley. She had agreed to watch them for 2 weeks. That was the deal. She needed the pay, and the cowboy needed to ride east to see about his sick sister. It was supposed to be simple, but the cowboy had not left. Instead, Dawson Clay stood beside his sorrel gelding, arms crossed, watching the sky turn gold behind the hills. "You planning on leavin' or not?" Evelyn asked, tying her dark hair back with a strip of cotton. Her voice was direct, not unkind. Dawson turned to her with a slow smile. "I will, just wanted to make sure you knew the real reason I asked you out here. I know cattle," she raised an eyebrow, "and I need the money." He stepped closer, slow like he was afraid to spook her. His boots sank quiet in the grass. "I do need the help, but that is not the only reason I came to your door." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Then what is?" Dawson looked past her, toward the mountains in the west, the last light catching in his blue eyes like a match flaring. "All I want is to watch the sunrise with you," she blinked. "That makes no sense. Maybe not, but it is the truth." She turned her back to him and walked to the edge of the pasture, heart thudding against her ribs like it wanted out. She had heard pretty talk before. Always ended the same, with her holding the pieces, but Dawson Clay was not like the others. He had not come sniffing around for favors, and he had not asked questions about her past. He had just dropped off the cattle and brought her a sack of flour and a book of poems she had once mentioned wanting to read. "You always say things like that," she called over her shoulder. "No," he said, voice closer now. "Only to you." They settled into a rhythm over the next 3 days. Dawson did not leave. He said his sister was on the mend and he had changed his mind. Evelyn did not ask again. She rose early to check the herd, cooked beans and cornbread over the fire, and read in the evenings while Dawson mended gear or whittled by lantern light. He was gentle with the animals, even the stubborn bull that kept testing the fence. He spoke softly, moved slow, never raised his voice. "You always been this patient?" she asked one night, watching him patch a saddle strap. "Had to be," he said. "My father was a hard man. I learned real young how to wait out storms." She was quiet a moment, then set her book down. "My husband died 2 winters ago. Pneumonia took him fast. I was alone with our boy, Adam. He was 6. Dawson looked up, eyes steady. "He wandered off one morning while I was breaking ice for water. Snow covered his tracks. They never found him." Her voice cracked just once. "I looked until my hands bled." Dawson set the leather aside and moved closer, kneeling beside her. "I am sorry," she swallowed. "I do not tell people that. They always look at me like I should have done more." "I do not," he said. "You did everything a mother could." The fire snapped between them. Evelyn found herself breathing easier. On the 6th morning, the cattle stirred early. A coyote had gotten too close in the night and spooked them. Evelyn and Dawson rode out before dawn, driving the herd back from the southern ridge. When the sun broke over the hills, spilling gold across the valley, they reined in side by side. Evelyn's breath caught. "It is beautiful." Dawson looked at her, not the sky. "Told you." She turned, meeting his eyes. There was no pressure there, no expectation, just quiet hope. "You really meant that, did you?" she asked. "About the sunrise," he nodded. "I could ride to town and back 100 times, but none of it would mean a thing if I did not get to share this with someone who sees it the way I do." Evelyn looked away, blinking fast. Her throat felt tight. "I see it," she whispered. That night they sat closer by the fire than before. Her shoulder brushed his arm and he did not pull away. She did not either. "You think you will stay out here?" he asked. "After the herd moves on, depends," she said, watching the flames. "Is there a reason to?" He turned toward her. "I can give you one." She looked up. He did not kiss her. Not yet, but his hand found hers warm and solid, and Evelyn O'Dell, who had built her life on caution and silence, let herself hold on. Rain came on the 7th night. Not in sheets, but soft and steady, drumming down on the canvas lean-to Dawson had pitched beside the wagon. Evelyn sat beneath it, her knees drawn up, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The fire hissed low in the damp, casting flickers of red light up Dawson's jaw as he whittled a sliver of cottonwood into the shape of a bird. "We were supposed to move the herd north tomorrow," she said, voice low. "They'll wait a day," he replied without looking up. "They're not in a hurry." She studied the curve of his hands. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" "Once," he said. "Back when I was 19, thought I'd go to Kansas, maybe Missouri. Ended up working freight for a man out of Cheyenne instead." Evelyn pulled the shawl tighter. "Why'd you stay?" Dawson laid the carving down. "Got tired of running before I ever really started. Besides, this land fits me. Quiet, wide, doesn't ask more than it gives." He glanced at her then. "I didn't come here by choice," she said. "But I stayed because it was the only place that didn't look like where I'd already lost everything." Neither of them spoke for a while. The rain whispered on canvas and grass. Evelyn reached out and traced the wing of the small wooden bird with her finger. "Looks like a meadowlark," she said. "I hoped it would," Dawson answered. "I used to hear one every morning at our old place. Just before sunup." He nodded, then leaned back on his hands, his hat tipped against the post behind him. "I thought about carving too, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to keep something I made." Evelyn looked at him hard. "Why wouldn't I? Because I haven't earned that trust yet." She didn't answer right away. The fire cracked and a gust of wind nudged the lean to's edge. Somewhere out in the dark, a calf bawled and was hushed quickly by its mother. "I don't give trust easy," she said finally. "But that doesn't mean it'll never come." He looked at her then, not smiling, not hopeful, just open. The next morning broke cold and clear, the grass wet underfoot and the herd restless after the long night. Evelyn saddled her mare alone, testing the cinch with a practiced tug. Dawson approached from the far fence line, leading his horse and carrying a length of coiled rope. "You see the bay cow limping?" he asked. "She's favoring her left foreleg, might be stone bruised. Want to ride out together and check her?" Evelyn mounted up. "I'll take the lead." They moved in silence at first, the sound of hooves soft on damp soil. When they reached the injured cow, Dawson dismounted without waiting and knelt beside the hoof. "Stone," he confirmed. "Small one, but deep." "I'll work it out." Evelyn stood beside the cow's shoulder, keeping her settled with a firm hand and low voice. "You ever think about marrying again?" Dawson asked without looking up. She didn't flinch. "Not till recently." He nodded, still focused on the hoof. "I wouldn't ask unless I meant it. I wouldn't answer unless I was sure." The cow shifted and he steadied her with a hand to her flank. "I don't want to rush it, Evelyn, but I don't want to let it pass by either." She looked down at him. "Are you asking?" He rose slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm saying I could see it, a house not far from here. A garden maybe, chickens, you reading by the stove, me coming in from the field." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. She'd imagined 100 futures since she buried her son, but never one that included someone staying. She touched the edge of his coat sleeve. "If I say yes, it won't be all light, I know. There are days I still wake up reaching for someone who's gone. I'll hold your hand on those days." Her breath caught in her chest, not from fear this time, but from the weight of something real settling beside her. They walked the horses back side by side. No words passed between them. They didn't need them. That evening, Dawson cooked. Salt pork and onions in a blackened pan, the scent curling through the still air. Evelyn sat nearby, patching a tear in her skirt, her needle moving steady through the fabric. "You write letters?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Though there's no one left to send them to." He stirred the pan. "I write to myself, fold the paper and keep it tucked in my Bible, things I can't say out loud." She looked up. "Like what?" "Like how I used to think I'd die before anyone really knew me." Evelyn set the needle down. "And now," he met her eyes, "now I think I've been known for a while, I just hadn't noticed." The moon rose pale over the prairie, the cattle settled. The lean-to still stood, canvas drying in the breeze. Evelyn stepped beside Dawson, not touching, but close. "I'm not someone who falls easy," she said. "I'm not someone who lets go." She nodded once. "Then we might just be what the other needs." He reached out and offered her the second carving. Another meadowlark, wings half spread. She took it without hesitation. By the 10th day, the sky had held without rain and the grass dried enough for the herd to move. Dawson and Evelyn rode at a slow pace, guiding the cattle north across a stretch of broken prairie where the wind carried the scent of sage and distant pine. The trail angled toward a series of low ridges, and beyond them, the open flats where Dawson planned to graze the cattle through early summer. Evelyn rode with her eyes on the land ahead. You ever think about putting roots down somewhere with trees? Dawson shifted in the saddle. Thought about it once, up in the Wind River Valley. There's a spot near the edge of the cottonwoods where the land slopes gentle and the river runs wide enough for trout. There's water enough for a garden, plenty, and good soil. You could grow anything there. She turned toward him. You still own it, my brother does. He said I could have it if I ever wanted to settle. A hawk turned slow circles above them. Evelyn watched it a long moment. Would you build it yourself? The house, I mean. I would. Timber from the ridge, stone for the hearth, nothing fancy. She nodded once, then looked back to the trail. I'd want a kitchen with a window that faces the hills. Dawson smiled with his eyes, not saying anything just yet. That night they camped near a shallow creek edged with willow. The cattle bunched close on the far bank, quiet and grazing. Dawson gathered kindling while Evelyn laid out the skillet and unwrapped a twist of hard cheese and dried apples. As dusk settled, the sound of frogs began in the reeds and the fire snapped low under the pot. Evelyn leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You close with your brother? She asked. Dawson poured water into a tin cup. Used to be. He's older by 5 years. Took off to join the Union Army when I was still working the fields. I didn't see him again till the war was over. Did he come back the same? No, he had a limp and looked through you more than at you. But he built something good with what he had left. Evelyn stirred the pot. I had a sister, younger, married a storekeeper in Nebraska. Haven't heard from her since the spring of '77. You right. I did. Once. No word came back. She didn't say anything else and Dawson didn't press. Later, after the fire had burned down and the horses were picketed, they walked the creek bank in silence. The stars pressed close overhead, the sky deep and velvet blue. You think you could be happy with a quiet life? Evelyn asked, her voice low. I think I already am, Dawson said. She paused. You don't miss town or noise or crowds. I had my fill riding cattle through Cheyenne, waiting in line at the rail yards. I'd rather hear the sound of water and someone breathing beside me. She stopped walking. You'd really take me to that land? He turned toward her. I'd build you that window. Her breath hitched just once. Do you want a family? He looked at her plainly. I want a life. If children come, I'd welcome them, but if it's just you and me, that'd be enough. Evelyn took a step closer. They stood eye to eye now, nothing between them but space that neither wanted anymore. I'm not afraid of being alone, she said. But I'm tired of carrying everything by myself. You don't have to, Dawson said. Not anymore. She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. They stood that way until the stars shifted westward and the night cooled deeper. In the morning, they moved camp again. The cattle followed easy. Evelyn rode with her shoulders looser, her eyes softer as they passed through a stand of wind-bent birch. They didn't speak much that day, but when they made camp again near the next ridge, Dawson knelt in the grass and unfolded a small cloth bundle he'd kept tied at the base of his saddle. Inside was a brass ring, plain but well-worn. This was my mother's, he said. She gave it to my brother's wife, who passed it to me 2 years ago, said to give it when I was sure. Evelyn knelt across from him, the wind tugging at her collar. I don't need promises written down, she said, but if you're offering a life, I'll take it. He pressed the ring into her palm. She didn't cry, neither did he. They just held each other's gaze and then, at last, each other. The land they came to by the end of the second week rose in long, gentle folds, the grass taller, the air thinner. From the ridge, the river curved silver through the valley, its banks lined with cottonwood and a scatter of wild chokecherry. Dawson reined in and waited while Evelyn rode up beside him, the wind lifting strands of her hair from beneath her hat. This is it, he said, voice low. My brother's land runs from that bend in the river to the ridge on the far side. Evelyn slid down from the saddle, boots crunching on the dry grass. She walked ahead a few paces, arms crossed, eyes tracking the lay of the land. He gave her space. She didn't need convincing, just time. Any neighbors? She asked, gaze fixed on a distant rise where a hawk was perched on a dead tree. Nearest ranch is a day's ride. Old couple, no children, they keep to themselves. She nodded, still quiet. We could build before frost sets in, Dawson said, if we start soon. One room to start, then add as we go. Spring's good for planting. Evelyn turned toward him. You ever built with your own hands? He stepped down from his horse. I put up a line shack once with a man from Carbon County. Took us a month, it didn't lean. Her mouth twitched. That's something. She walked back to where he stood, then reached for the reins and led her mare toward the river. He followed without speaking, letting the sound of hooves and the steady rush of water fill the space between them. At the bank, she crouched and dipped her hand in. The water ran cold and fast over her fingers. There's trout in here, she asked, near the rocks mostly. She straightened and looked out across the valley again. I'd like a place to hang laundry where it catches full sun, he nodded. And a porch deep enough to sit through a summer storm, she glanced at him. You'd sit with me, every time. That night they didn't set a fire. The air was mild and the sky clear enough to see every star. They lay on their bedrolls with only the sound of crickets and the occasional shuffle from the herd. Evelyn turned her head toward him in the dark. You ever think about the kind of man you've become? He was quiet before answering. I used to be angry more than not. At my father, at the war, at things I couldn't name, then I let go of it. Didn't seem to help anything. She folded her hands beneath her head. I was hard with most folks after Adam, not out loud, just inside. I didn't know how to stop. You stopped with me. She didn't answer that, just breathed deeper, slower. The next morning they walked the stretch where the house would go. Dawson marked the corners with stones, and Evelyn paced the space herself, measuring with her steps and eyes. She knelt once and pressed her palm to the earth. This'll hold it, she said. He crouched beside her. I'll fetch the wagon from Cheyenne next week. It's got the tools my brother set aside. You can come if you want. I'll come, she said. I want to choose the stove. Later, they passed through a cluster of cottonwoods and found a hollow where the wind didn't reach. Dawson pointed at a smooth stretch of earth near the base of an old stump. Good spot for a root cellar. Stays cool even at high sun. Evelyn ran her fingers along the bark. You think we'll have enough to store? If we work side by side, he said, we'll have more than enough. She looked up at him, eyes steady. Then let's build it. He reached for her hand, not needing to say more. And Evelyn, who had once buried every hope beneath grief and dust, laced her fingers through his and held on. The last boards of the cabin went up under a pale blue August sky, the kind that stretched so wide it made a person feel hushed. Dawson hammered the final nail into the roofline while Evelyn steadied the ladder below, her hands braced firm on the frame. Her sleeves rolled above her elbows. When he climbed down, she handed him a damp cloth and stepped back to look at the cabin. It wasn't grand, just one room with a short porch and a lean-to for the stove, but the lines were straight, the shingles tight, and the door swung even. The smell of fresh-cut pine still clung to the walls. I don't need more than this, she said. Not when it's ours. Dawson wiped the sweat from his brow. We'll fill it slow, piece by piece. They moved inside together, each carrying a bundle. She laid her quilt across the small bed frame they'd hauled up from the wagon. He set the cast iron pot on the shelf he'd built near the stove. A crate of flour sat beside a crock of preserved peaches, and a folded shirt waited on the stool near the foot of the bed. That night, they lit the oil lamp and sat cross-legged on the floor with their supper between them, bread she'd baked in the coals, and a bit of cured venison Dawson had hunted 3 days earlier. The wind moved soft outside, brushing the chinks in the wall like a whisper. Did you think it would feel like this? Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. Dawson shook his head. I didn't know it could. She leaned back on her hands, watching the flicker of lamplight on the ceiling. I used to think peace was something that belonged to other people. The ones who hadn't been hollowed out. He looked at her then, the lines of her face softened by the glow. You're not hollow, Evelyn. You're made of everything you kept alive. They didn't speak after that, not until the lamp burned low. She reached for his hand and pulled him gently to his feet. They lay down together for the first time in the bed they built. No hesitation between them, just breathe and warmth, and the quiet certainty of having chosen each other without a single doubt left. In the weeks that followed, the days settled into something solid. Dawson cleared a patch of earth near the cabin and built a fence to keep the mule from trampling it. Evelyn planted carrots, wild onion, and beans in careful rows, her hands working the soil with knowledge older than grief. Every evening, Dawson hauled water from the river while she boiled it for washing or poured it over the garden with slow, sure movements. They built a smokehouse with stones and sod. She learned how he liked his coffee strong, with a pinch of salt, and he learned how she folded her shirts, sleeves tucked in once over, then rolled. They didn't speak of the past unless it came soft and unbidden, and when it did, it was met without pity. One afternoon, as the sun tipped west and the last of the corn shoots broke through the dirt, Evelyn crouched by the garden bed and ran a hand over her belly. Dawson watched her from the porch, setting aside the broken harness he'd been mending. "You all right?" he asked. She looked over her shoulder, eyes bright. "I think I'm late." He stepped down, boots quiet in the grass, and knelt beside her. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly. "I've counted 3 times, and I've been hungry at odd hours." He didn't speak right away. Just reached out, resting a hand just above hers. She covered it with her own. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again," she whispered. "You're not alone in it," Dawson said. "Not for one breath of it." The leaves turned yellow and gold. Evelyn knit a small blanket from soft wool Dawson traded for in town. He added a second shelf for jars. They filled it with dried herbs, smoked meat, and the last of the summer peaches. By the time snow came in November, the cabin felt lived in, worn at the edges in a way that meant comfort. They kept warm with stacked wood and the weight of one another beneath thick quilts. Evelyn's belly rounded gentle beneath her dress, and Dawson moved slower with her, letting the days stretch long and quiet. One evening, she sat in the rocker Dawson had built, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned the page in some time. He crouched by the hearth, feeding the fire. "Do you miss the trail?" she asked. He shook his head. "I've ridden enough miles. I've got everything I want right here." She leaned forward and ran her fingers through his hair, letting them tangle briefly before she rested them against his cheek. "I never thought I'd have this, not again." "You didn't have it before," he said gently. "Not like this." She smiled then, and he stood, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Winter held long and steady over the valley. When the child came in early March, the river was still frozen and the sky the pale color of bone. Dawson stayed by her side the entire night, his hands steady, his voice low. Their daughter arrived just before dawn, lungs strong, fists tight. Evelyn held her close and wept into the down blanket. Dawson sat beside them, one hand on Evelyn's back, the other cradling the curve of his child's foot. "She's here," Evelyn whispered, "and she's whole." They named her Clara, after Evelyn's mother, and wrapped her in the meadowlark blanket Evelyn had finished by lamplight in the weeks before. Each morning after, Dawson took Clara out into the sun, walking the frost-rimmed edge of the porch, whispering to her about the trees, the wind, and the river that would one day carry her skipping stones. Evelyn watched from the window, her heart full in the quiet way that doesn't need words. They built nothing grand, but everything they had held meaning. A porch that caught morning light, a bed that never stood empty, a garden that fed 3. Together they grew older without ever growing apart. The past didn't vanish, but it softened into memory. What remained was the quiet, steady love of 2 people who had found home not in a place, but in one another, and that was enough. Always.